Great. Hi, good afternoon, all. Welcome to today's seminar. I'm so pleased to be with you, and I'm just in awe of all of your faces. It's so amazing to see everyone. I like a lot of people have been sort of cooped in and had very limited interaction with folks. So it's nice to connect with folks. So thank you for joining me today. I'm going to share my screen and my presentation. And I'm going to get started. And I'm just going to wait for confirmation from Barbara that folks can see my slide deck.
Yes.
Great, great. So thank you, Barbara, for the introduction and for inviting me to talk with folks. I want to say that I would not say that I'm an expert. I would say I have a lot of experience, that I've done a lot of things with distance learning and online learning, including the things Barbara has mentioned, as well as teaching professional development online course currently. I've done 3 iterations of that, co-teach with a colleague from the Hewitt School. I've also taken an online course about teaching online, and as my role as liaison for the Hybrid Learning Consortium, I've done a lot of work with supporting students in these online courses. So if you would like to keep in contact, my Twitter information is in the lower left-hand corner, and I will share it at the end of this presentation. I also want to give a shout out to the Hybrid Learning Consortium. I think they have been really at the lead of online and distance learning for years. They are actually changing organization. They will be known as Constellation Learning, and I've been told that they're going to be ready to launch their distance and online learning courses starting July 1st. So definitely look out for information from them. So the agenda today, I want to first give a kudos to, there was a presenter who did a different webinar with NYSAIS, that's Elizabeth Johnson. And it's interesting because as I was putting together a distance learning guide for my school, and to share with the rest of teachers, I had a lot of tips and best practices, and they were scattered. And I reviewed her presentation as well as another seminar, and her presentation allowed me to think about how to cluster my ideas. So I'm borrowing some of the sort of structure from her presentation. For those who saw her presentation, I made mine consistent with her organization, so that I think that could be helpful for people who saw both presentations. So I want to give her a special shout out. And there's something odd on my screen. I don't know if folks, some kind of writing. All right. So the agenda for today, borrowing from Lisbeth's structure, I'm going to use similar structure. So I'm going to talk about communication. We're going to talk about your platform. We're going to talk about the learner experience and content. And then I'm going to cover videos and video conferencing. So whenever you see the icon, the person's, the orange face, that's letting you know that we're talking about communication. The house icon, that's letting you know we're talking about platform. The girl with the backpack, that's the learner experience and content. And then the camera, we're talking about videos and video conferencing. So to begin with communication, I was hoping for this to be a very interactive session, but with the number of participants, we're gonna hold questions to the end. But one way that you can keep engaged and interact is I'm gonna share some stories, and based on the stories, you'll see that the top of the screen doesn't have a title. And so what I'm hoping that you can do throughout the presentation in the chat feature, you can, while I'm telling these stories, you can plop in what you think the moral of the story is, or what's the tip, okay? So starting with tip number 1, you see in the upper left-hand screen, you see an image of Zoom, which we're using now. Zoom is great for those synchronous real-time communications. You can have video interactions with students. It's important to, whatever venue you use, to have some kind of synchronous real-time communication, because your students will have questions. And we find that the synchronous back and forth allows for more clarity. You can also host a chat room. You see in the bottom right-hand corner, I put a link to some chat rooms that you can embed onto your platform. And then you can have, text real-time conversations. When having these synchronous conversations, you have to think about how you're going to schedule them. So is your school giving you or scheduling time for you to have these synchronous conversations? But if not, you want to think about, can they book an appointment with you? Google Calendar has this wonderful feature where you can, instead of creating an event, you can create an appointment, and then students can go onto that appointment calendar and just pick the time they want to meet with you. And it'll be based on the time slots that you make available, of course. And then it will automatically add that appointment to your Google Calendar and to the student's Google Calendar. So when you're having these synchronous conversations, whether it's a chat or a Zoom meeting, you can decide to have students book an appointment with you, or you can have drop-in hours. So say I'm going to be available Mondays from 1 to 2, and just, I'm going to have my Zoom open or the chat room open, and you can correspond with me that way. Then you also have to think about the asynchronous communication. So I imagine a lot of people might just have email. So if students have an individual question or want to give you some individual and personal information, email is probably the best way to do that. But you might also consider putting a discussion board on your platform, so that the benefit of that is that other students are able to answer questions, to see your answers to questions. And so that's a great way to communicate. So in the chat, if you think you know the tip from what I just said, plop in a tip. So first tip is to consider both real-time and asynchronous ways to communicate with your students. On to tip 2. When you're on, as a teacher, we know it's important to give instructions and to give clear instructions. But in a distance learning course, that is complicated because in a brick and mortar class, you can always amend instructions in class, face to face in real time. And you won't have the benefit of doing that in your distance learning course, and not without potentially some students seeing the revisions and not. So you have to be really mindful about how you're giving instructions in your distance learning course. So think about the things that you normally say to students in class and add those to your written instructions. I would consider also supplementing those instructions with images. So you see on the right is a sort of tutorial, a screenshot of a tutorial that I made for students. Notice that I have text and I have images that really help students. But on the left, I also provide videos, I call them labcasts. I'm a science teacher, so I call them, sort of a play on the word podcast, labcast. I know it's kind of cheesy, but the video labcasts show students how to complete an activity or a lab, especially if you're thinking about a hands-on or some kind of lab. You might want to have the video there. So feel free to pop in what you think tip number 2 is. And by the way, we're going to have 20 tips. So in the chat, if you can figure out what the tip is, that'd be great. My tip here is give more instructions on assignments than you would in a brick and mortar class. So really kind of overdo the instructions. And I would consider supplementing those instructions with a video and or images. Continuing on to communication. Notice this is a project in an online course that I designed, a biotech online class. Notice that there are several deadlines. So notice that the video is due on a certain date, but notice students had to submit a plan in advance. And I think this is perhaps good practice in a brick and mortar class as well. But in the distance learning course, it's even more important, because what you don't want to do is a student spending a week on an assignment and then realize that they're in big trouble when you're near the due date. So you won't, in a brick and mortar class, you'll have the, you have the capability of checking in with students in each class and, having informal conversations. But in a distance learning course, that presents a unique issue. So notice that there are deadlines throughout for certain projects. So pop in what you think that tip is. My tip is set deadlines for individual assignments and smaller tasks. That includes some folks are perhaps thinking of sending students away with a packet and a bunch of other stuff and say, all of this is due next week or the week after next week. And I would strongly advise against that. In a distance learning course, you can find students checking out and falling behind. And while that is not a unique issue to brick and mortar classes, it's even more exacerbated in a distance learning course. So set individual deadlines for individual assignments, for tasks, for drafts. In a distance learning course, that's going to be important. This is an image of, so now we're moving on to platform. This is an image of of a middle school site that I used last year for Power School. It has all of the resources, and I point this out because there might be some teachers thinking about emailing assignments to students during this time and receiving assignments through email, and that can be tricky. If you think about a student who's getting tons of emails, and if you use Gmail, for example, a lot of those emails are in threads or nested, and sometimes you won't know if there's been a response. I mean, a lot of stuff can get lost in email, and I think we don't want to give the students any more to think of than necessary. So if you have a learning management system, I would advise doing that and having all of your resources in one place, in one location. So I think I probably gave this one away. Host all of your content in one place. Don't email some things and have other things on your learning management system and then other things in Shobi and Dropbox. Figure out a way to get all of your content in one place. This is especially important for a distance learning course where they're going to have to rely on a central location to get their stuff. So don't add more to their plate by having stuff scattered. Now, continuing on with platform, here are some images of two different sites. And this is the page navigation for those sites. So notice that they're organized by week. They don't necessarily have to be organized by week, but here are some examples. Notice there's a description of the unit for that week or the content. And this is, I think, a helpful thing to think about in your platform. If you think you know what the tip is, feel free to pop in what you think I'm suggesting here. It's important for you to decide how to organize your content. You need a consistent theme for how you organize your content on your platform. Is it by time, week 1, week 2, week 3? Is it by topic, photosynthesis, respiration, etc., or some other structure? Just make sure you have a consistent way of organizing your content. This is this is from these two images are from the same online course. See week 1 and week 2. What do you could pop in the chat, what do you notice about the organization of these pages between week 1 and week 2? And that should let you know what my next tip is. Definitely use the same or very similar format throughout your platform. Your pages, once students understand your first page, they should understand how the rest of your pages will be organized. So if you're having, for example, if you start with a framing video, make sure it's in the same location. So if it's in the top left-hand corner, always have your framing video in the top left-hand corner. If you have a polling location, make sure so just make sure that, especially this is, I think, good practice in a brick and mortar learning management system, but for a distance learning course, again, the idea is to lessen the cognitive load for these students. So if there's predictability about the structure of your platform, that will, I think, ease anxiety and allow students to focus on the content and not trying to find your content. So if you have a box that has all the homework assignments for the week, have that for every week and have it in the same location. If there's some weeks where you're not assigning homework, then you can just put no homework this week, but you have a similar structure for your platform. Speaking of structure of your platform, there are two things that I like to do. I like to have a list of, this is what you have to accomplish this week. And again, this is probably good practice for a brick and mortar class. This is what we're going to do this unit. But for a distance learning course, you definitely want some kind of to-do list that organizes your content so students can say, oh, this week I'm going to do step 1, step 2, step 3. And I would also suggest using verbs so it's clear what they're doing for that task. So are they discussing something? Are they watching something? Are they completing something? Are they speaking? Put those verbs in because what you don't want students to do is say, oh, I thought I just had to read something, but actually you wanted them to respond to questions. So use verbs in your to-do list and include an overview of the week's work. I like to use a framing video, a short framing video. This is probably the longest. I would suggest 4 minutes on this one, but a short, this is what we're doing for the week. Here are some highlights about what's going on. Again, this is important for a distance learning course because you won't have that face-to-face daily time with students. So you need, there needs to be some clarity about the expectations for a unit of work, whether it's a week or a unit. Make sure you do that. So what do you think this tip is? Pop that in the chat. The tip is to provide an overview and a to-do list for the work within a week or within a unit, however you're organizing your content. Make sure when you chunk it, also provide an overview and a to-do list. Similar to that, notice these are sub-pages in the page navigation. So you can see on the left, you see it says week 1, and then it has sub-pages for Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But in a current course that I'm teaching, a standards-based grading course, it actually made more sense for the sub-pages to be the different benchmarks for the content. But I would say, I'm going to just give this one away, is that don't clutter each page with a lot of content. You're going to have, one, you're going to have loading issues. Students are, if you have like videos and other stuff, it's good. You're going to have time issues with loading. And if it's too cluttered, kids are going to get confused. So I would divide your content into separate pages. So use sub-pages. If your platform allows you to do sub-pages, if not, then have separate pages, but make sure you divide your content into different pages. This one might be controversial for if there are administrators in this group, or if your administrator is telling you something different. But this is an image of my current learning management system. I teach a biotechnology research class to 11th and 12th graders. And the last unit of the year was actually a culminating unit where students are presenting, doing original research for the DNA barcoding competition that entails going out into the field, then going back into the lab, extracting DNA, purifying DNA, amplifying DNA, getting it sequenced and analyzed and such. And we're not going to be able to do that at all. I mean, there's no distance learning version of that. The equipment alone, that we're talking about thousands of dollars of equipment. So they're not going to be able to do that, unfortunately. But you know, I'm actually doing a new unit on viruses and epidemics, which is a very timely opportunity for our students to learn, you know, about the current crisis. So the tip here is you're gonna have to rethink what you're doing, rethink what you're planning, rethink your content, rethink what you want your students to do. You know, if there are certain tasks that you love for students to do, like they need to do some conversational piece, you may have to rethink how that's done, or you might have to, there are going to be some tasks that you will plan that they're not going to be able to do for the next few weeks. And I think, and as well as assessments, you may want to rethink how you're doing assessments. If you're getting different directions from your administrators, they don't know what they're talking about. I'll just be very clear there that in a distance learning situation in which it's last minute and we've had to sort of get some things together in the last week or so, the idea that you can run your course as you normally do, that is a mistake. And so you really need to rethink, you know, and it's there are going to be some things that you're going to be able to adjust and incorporate. But if you are emotionally in love and you know, committed to what you had planned in the spring, you're gonna have to rethink that. I hate to burst your bubble. To that end, though, there are some things that you can do. So DGZAM is a platform that allows you to administer exams. Yes, it's from a distance. And it's online. So I don't think it's ever going to be 100% secure, but you know, it does allow for you to create an exam, administer it. You can give a password to students, you can have a time. The good thing about DigiZam is it locks down the device. So students can't, you know, move away from that page and go onto a web browser and check something out. So there are some ways that you can have some assessment security. So DigiZam is one example of that. Your platforms might have online assessment tools. So for example, one thing you could do is scramble questions or draw questions from a bank so that, you know, each student gets a different version. I would say if your platform allows you to time it, I would have a timer. And that will at least minimize the opportunity for students to then, you know, start Googling stuff because, you know, they're on the clock. They might not have that luxury if you set the time correctly. But I would caution you that, you know, this is not foolproof, right? So just because DigiZam locks down your laptop doesn't mean you can't have your cell phone in your other hand, you know? It doesn't mean that you can't collaborate via phone with someone else who's taking the exam from home. So I would just rethink assessments and maybe allow for, you know, non-testing. But if you absolutely need to have testing, then, you know, think through some of the apps and options that are available. But this is a great opportunity to do some alternative assessments. You know, I have an assessment in which I have students design their own assessment. And I say, look, here are the learning targets. And here's the level I need you to be at. You're currently at a level 3. This is what will show a level 4. It's your choice. Prove to me that you're at level 4, and they decide how they prove to me. So that way you have some flexibility there. you're going to find that you're going to get invited to a lot of free apps now and online platforms. And my inbox is full of these free trials, and and these companies are doing wonderful things by offering. Zoom is offering free licenses to schools, and you're going to discover a lot of cool things. And definitely some of them try out, but I would consider limiting any new tools that you're going to use during this time. Students might not have accounts, or they might need to create accounts, or they might lose their passwords, or they may need help using it. You might not know how to use it. So I would, if you look at your platform, your learning management system, if you have one, may already have features that maybe you haven't explored. So rather than finding the really cool polling feature online somewhere, see if your learning management system already has a poll. And chances are students are already familiar with that poll, and discussion threads, etc. So try to use whatever native apps and stuff that you already have. So I think I've kind of given away this one. I would suggest for distance learning, use a small number of programs and platforms, especially since you no longer have the luxury of sitting down next to a student and working on making sure they know how to use tools. Definitely try to limit that. And if all of us are experimenting with new tools, imagine what that is going to be like for a student who is being requested to use all of these new tools. This looks like a jumbled mess, and I really apologize for this slide. But I wanted to show you a cool feature that some of your platforms may allow you to do, because I mentioned that you want to limit new tools, but there might be some tools that you just absolutely need. Like if you're a language teacher and you want them to do some voice recording thing, maybe your platform doesn't have that currently. So maybe you do want to use a third-party tool, but one way to limit the sort of cognitive load for students and to prevent distractions, because what you don't want to do is send kids off to these third-party sites and then they start getting distracted and going down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, is hosted on your learning management system, on your platform. And so for a lot of these online tools, they have a share button that will show you an embed code, and then you can copy that embed code. So this is an embed code from YouTube. And then on your platform, you'll see something that allows you to paste embed codes, and then it will host that third-party content onto your site. So for example, in this image, I'm showing the third-party content is a video that I created on YouTube. And so rather than sending a link or only sending a link on my platform, I actually have the content on my platform for students to interact with it there. So if you think you know what this tip is, can you pop that in the chat? I would provide redundant access to third-party content. So I mentioned, yes, it's good to have the link if you absolutely need it, because sometimes the embedding doesn't necessarily work perfectly, or maybe there's a crash or something, or who knows what happens, what kind of tech issues happen. So yes, I would maybe still have the link, but also have it embedded on your platform so that they don't have to go to some third-party site to access your content. This is also true for any other links that you have. So this is, I think, perhaps annoying to see, but I would provide a hyperlink and the URL to any content that you are providing off-site. The reason for this is, I've had situations in which students can't click on the hyperlink, you know, maybe it's an iPad that they're using and for some reason the touch is not working well, or, you know, or it's a broken link or whatever. So in those cases, the students can then just select the URL address and paste it into the web browser. And so there is a redundancy there, because what you don't want to do is students can access your content and then you're getting emails about, oh, this page is not working, and you have to go on and fix it and then send a message out to students saying, oh, it's been fixed. So try to plan for that in advance and have redundant access to all of your content. So hyperlink, pasting URL in, embedding it. There's no such thing as overdoing it. So you can have a hyperlink, you can paste the text of the URL and embed the item all in one place, so that if there are any issues, students can access your content. You know, we don't want to give students an excuse not to do something, you know, in this course. Now moving on to, I've moved on to learner experience. I'm moving away from platform, sorry. This is an image from an assignment, and I think a lot of people already do this, but I want to highlight this as something that's especially important in a distance learning course. So this is a presentation that a student made. They had to predict what would happen in you know, a lab protocol if certain steps were skipped, or, you know, or there were certain issues. And so this student created a Google slide presentation and shared it with me. And I had the student share with me before the deadline. And then, you know, on a daily basis or every other day basis, I would log in and I would give comments. And I think a lot of folks are already doing this in a brick and mortar class. And that's great. Why it's especially important in a distance learning course is because you need the interaction between you and the student. If you're familiar with the, what are those called? The MOOC, the MOOCs, those are massive online courses. They are notorious for having abysmal completion rates. I mean, single digit completion rates that students, people go on to these MOOCs thinking they're gonna do something, they're gonna learn about a new topic, and then they drop out, you know, they don't actually finish the content. Part of the reason might be that there isn't interaction between the instructor and the student and other students. So as much interaction as you can build into your distance learning course, do that. So if students are working on an assignment, you know, have them share it with you on Google Drive, and you can, you know, pop in comments. You know, you can have students collaborate and pop in comments on other students' work. So as much as you can build the interaction with yourself and the students and other students, the better. So those discussion threads, I know some people are not big fans of those online discussion threads, but a benefit of that is that it allows students to interact and be engaged with each other. Same thing with Zoom and chats and all those stuff. So those might seem like bells and whistles for some of you, but what's going to happen is that you're going to get more interaction, and that's going to allow students to stay motivated to continue working on your content. So if you think you know the tip here, pop that into the chat. You want to engage and interact with students. You want to let students interact with each other, and you want to give regular feedback. You know, this is especially important for a distance learning course where, again, you're not going to have the, you know, run into a student in the hallway and say, hey, how's that project going? You know, or, you know, they seen you in the courtyard and they say, oh, I have to work on Mr. Wilson's thing. You know, you're not going to have a lot of that sort of those informal check-ins are really helpful on a campus, and you won't have that capability in a distance learning course. So as much as you can structure those interactions, even if they seem kind of cheesy, anything to get them interacting with each other and with you and engaging, the better, you know. So even have polls, you know, some polls and surveys, you know. That's a good way to get opinions and students to interact with your content with each other. This is an example of another interaction is to have when students complete assignments, you can have them post feedback to each other. That's sort of a way to get more engagement. So I think it's good practice anyway, but I think in a distance learning course, having students provide feedback to each other is just another opportunity for interaction, of engagement. The more that you can do, the better. Yeah. Onto discussion boards. Discussion boards can be tricky, I have to say. I've been a participant in online courses where they had discussion boards and it really fell flat, because what was happening is that people were posting at the last minute. They were, oh, I have to get my discussion post done so I could get credit. And then, oh, if the deadline is this date, they go in like an hour before. And then what ends up happening? There's no discussion. It's just a random assortment of postings, like blogs or stuff. And blogs are fine, but, the reason why we're having these online discussions is because we want the interaction between students. So I would suggest giving some guidance about those discussion threads and have multiple postings and require responses and give deadlines for each of those, right? So post one and two, they're due on this date. Then you want them to respond a day or two later to someone else's comments, and then maybe respond to another person's comment. So that way you're sort of scaffolding a discussion, and you're sort of, yes, it's kind of artificially creating a discussion, but you're incentivizing having these discussions so that it's not just random musings of people sort of trying to sound sophisticated. It's a real dialogue and conversation. So when you're doing online discussion boards, give guidance about the number of posts, about the timing, the dates, about what is a quality discussion post, right? So we don't want the hundreds like, oh, I agree, that's so smart. Oh, thank you for posting, So give them, if you want to have a rubric or something, or, or a line that says, these are the things we don't want. This is, or give some examples of a good post or a good response. Give some think about that and give some guidance about that, and definitely stagger those deadlines for post and response so that you don't have this last minute flooding of posts that sort of defeat the purpose of having an online discussion anyway. On to continuing on with learner experience. I think one thing that people are nervous about in a distance learning course is, how am I going to do hands-on learning? Everything's going to be virtual. They're going to write lab reports, or they're going to create graphs, or they're going to do Google Docs and all that kind of stuff. And that's a lot of time on the screen, I have to say. And I think a lot of us are worried about, in this distance learning model, if all the classes and all the students and all the teachers are using this model, that's a lot of screen time. And in fact, in my school, we're having no classes on Wednesdays, so the students don't have to be on screens in Zoom meetings. So in addition, I would say, there are things that you can do that's hands-on, that's offline. So are you going to have them draw some things or create art, create three-dimensional models? I know if there's science folks in the room, I'm planning a science distance learning presentation with NYSAIS as well. But are there some do-it-yourself labs that you can do? Can they record themselves doing skits? Can they create a costume? There are a lot of things that create a board game, and have them do a lot of things that are hands-on. So definitely don't shy away from hands-on learning. Incorporate it into your distance learning platform, your course. But there are some things that can be helpful for doing that. For example, if you see on the far left, there was a three-dimensional model that I had my students create, and they had to submit a plan. These are the materials that I'm going to use. This is a sketch of my plan. And that way, I can provide some assistance and have them think through some things before they go down that rabbit hole. In addition, on the right, you'll see that for do-it-yourself, a DIY lab, I made sure that I listed the materials, let them know, and let them know in advance of the lab. So, so when they're seeing this lab, when they get to this lab, they already know, and they probably learned in the framing video, make sure you get these items, So if you are having a do-it-yourself kind of lab situation, or some kind of art project or something, share a materials list in advance, so that if they need to buy something or they need to figure out how to get certain things, that is a good way to still have that hands-on learning. So the take home here is, yes, incorporate hands-on learning, but you have to consider extra preparation for that. So having submit plans, share materials list in advance, that kind of stuff is going to be helpful. Continuing on this idea of hands-on learning. So then the question is, well, how do I know that the hands-on learning? How do I know that they did what I wanted to do, So in this DNA model building challenge, they had to submit a video. So they created their model, and then they recorded the model, and them explaining the model was how they actually got credit. So they didn't get credit for the model itself, they got credit for the video, and then in the video, they had to show certain aspects of their model. So I can see that happening in an art class, or any other sort of hands-on thing, PE, let's take a video of yourself doing some jumping jacks or whatever, like a part of a run or something that you have to do, So providing evidence is going to be important. It doesn't have to be a video. In this lab, I asked students to take some images for me and plop those images into their write-up. And you could even have them, you have to be in the image yourself, So there are ways to get evidence for doing hands-on learning. So if you think you know what the tip is on this one, if you can plop that into the chat. So yes, incorporate hands-on learning, but you're going to have to think about what's the evidence that you're having students submit showing that they did complete the hands-on learning. Maybe it's a journal prompt or something, maybe it's journaling or blogging or, something like that. But definitely, you're going to have to think about how are students going to show evidence of doing that hands-on learning. Related to that, collaboration I think is going to be important. One thing about MOOCs that I find problematic is that a lot of it is individual assignments. Read this, answer these questions, watch this video, answer these questions, submit this document, and it's all siloed work. And as we talked about earlier in this presentation, the more interactions, the better. So, consider what do collaborative assignments look like in your distance learning course. The beauty of wikis and Google Docs is that you can have, and there are a bunch of other apps and stuff where students can collaborate on stuff. So this happens to be an image of a collaborative wiki site that students created on the genetic disorder project, but it doesn't have to, it could be you can make it interesting. You can make create a Facebook page about this campaign or something like that, or now students are able to share stuff, share videos, and obviously slide presentations can be shared. Even if you had a hands-on like experiment kind of thing, you can have them, they're collaborating on designing the experiment, and then at home they are conducting the experiment, and then they're coming back to share their data, and then they're separating to do their individual write-up. So the entire assignment doesn't have to be collaborative, but you can have collaborative aspects to the assignment. Yeah, if you want them to write something, you can have some collaborative writing as well. Just because it's a distance learning course doesn't mean that collaboration isn't possible. And especially with the tools that are out now, there's no reason why you should not have collaborative stuff. And especially with Zoom, now folks can get on a video and chat with each other. You can do things like host a Zoom meeting and then have breakout rooms in your Zoom meeting so those individual groups can meet. I'm working on a project in which I'm organizing my live session with introducing a project or an assignment or a quick assignment, and then I'm putting students into their breakout rooms, and then I can go from breakout room to breakout room and answer questions and give feedback and stuff. So definitely you want to do that. If you can pop in what you think this tip is, that'd be great. Yep, the tip is to incorporate collaborative learning. You know, again, as I mentioned about the collaboration, the interactions, that's going to keep the students engaged in a platform that's easy to not be engaged. So collaborative learning should still be happening. But then you have to think about how, you know, and this is also true for any collaborative assignment. You know, I know I've, I shouldn't say this on video, but I've worked with colleagues and on collaborative stuff and end up doing the bulk of the work, you know? So that's always going to be a possibility. And you have to, in your brick and mortar classes, you have to work through, how do I know everyone's contributing as well? And in a distance learning class in which students are in different homes, it's especially important to figure out how you're going to have individual accountability, contributions by each person in the group. On the left is an image of version history from Google. So this is a collaborative Google Doc assignment. And I can tell from this time, it's color coded. I covered the names to protect my students, but you can see purple is one student, and look at this other color. So, you know, again, you have to go into these versions and see what they did. But, you know, this is an interesting conversation that needs to be had with this group, where this one student is popping in a lot of stuff, apparently, and then the student in purple went in that one time. So if you can have, you know, when you have students working together, insist on a collaborative document and insist on being shared on that document so that you can look at the version history and see what's happening, which is in line with also giving feedback. So if you're already planning to give feedback on this distance learning course, looking at the version history makes a lot of sense. And then of course, there's the old-fashioned polling or Google form that you can send out, you know, hey, would you want to work with this person again, you know? So yeah, you know, you might have, you know, some questions that are, hey, you know, tell me who did what, or, you know, tell me about how each person contributed. But a easy way to get at that answer, where you perhaps students are probably more honest about answering the question, is, would you want to work with the student on the next project? And that will give you an idea if folks are collaborating. So if you think you know the tip on this one, definitely pop that into the chat. So yes, while you incorporate collaborative learning, you definitely have to consider student accountability. What does individual student accountability look like for your collaborative assignment in your distance learning course? Now I'm going to move on to videos, the last section, because I think videos are going to be something that a lot of folks are going to use. So I want to spend a little bit of time on videos. This first tip is, I'm sort of laughing thinking about this tip because it's exactly one of those do as I say, don't do as I do kind of scenarios. But I would say that when you're doing video conferences, you want that to really be reserved for the interactions between students. And then any information that you have to give, put that in the video, you know? So, because we want to maximize the student to student and student to teacher interactions. So the precious time that you do get to Zoom or chat or all that kind of stuff, you want those to be for interactions. So design your live sessions to be interactive. So is it that, you know, you're giving instructions in the beginning and then you're breaking them up into their breakout groups, and then they're coming back and sharing, you know, there are things that you can, you know, is it a discussion, a full class discussion that's happening? And then if you're sort of, this is, you know, these are the steps for photosynthesis and blah, 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 that can happy that you can record yourself on the screen talking about that, and don't use that for and share the link to that, and then use the Zoom for the interactions. There are a number of different types of videos you can make. So in the top left-hand corner, this is one of those framing videos that I suggest making. So like at the previewing a unit or a week. Obviously on the top right-hand corner, you can make a video about teaching a concept, demonstrating a concept, sort of the traditional direct instruction. The lower left-hand corner, I'm explaining how to use an online tool that also happens to be part of a larger project. So you can also use videos to explain a project or demonstrate how to use a tool. On the lower right-hand corner, that's the lab cast that I was talking about earlier. So this is a video showing, these are the steps of the experiment. This is how you use this equipment. This is where this is, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would say the tip here is use video for a variety of purposes. Don't just use video to teach a concept, use video for a bunch of other things as well. While keeping in mind the interactive features you want on the video conferences and the sort of direct instruction, offload those into videos. There's this quote on the right. I don't know if anyone here speaks Italian, but if you do, if you can tell me what that says on the right while I talk through some of this other stuff. That'd be great. So I would say, I've done flipped learning for a long time, and I've made a lot of videos, and I do edits and all that other stuff. And I think that can be overwhelming to folks who are, sort of just, you've been thrusted onto this sort of video stuff. And I would say, take it easy. Don't worry about having these high quality videos. It really is the law of diminishing returns. There are some bare minimum requirements that you have to think about. Make sure your text, if you have text on the screen, make sure that's visible, make sure it's large, make sure, you have images, make sure they're clear and large, lighting. I don't know if you can tell, but I actually have a camera, not a camera, a lamp that's shining on my face now. And that's especially important for people of my skin tone, because on video, people of my skin color tend to show up darker on screen. And especially if there's light shining from the back, you're gonna cast a shadow onto your camera. So when you're creating your videos, and if you're in your videos, take that in consideration. Make sure the light is front facing, it's facing your face. Voices need to be loud and clear, talk slowly. One issue that a lot of people mistake is the text. Make sure the text that you have contrast. So either dark text on light background or light text on dark, I don't know if I said that right, but light text, dark background, dark text, light background, right? And definitely those red, blue combinations are, awful. You can't see that. And this is also true for the, slide presentations as well. And keep those videos short. Keep them short. I would say under 10 minutes, but if you can do under 5 minutes, that's even better. It's better to break them up into shorter videos than to have one long video that's going to be overwhelming to students. And if anyone has figured out that the Italian on the screen, it's that quote, the perfect is the enemy of the good, so don't spend a lot of time making the perfect video. You can geek out, maybe next year if you want to continue more video instruction, but for now, get yourself slides, use a screen recorder, record those slides, talking over slides, and call it a day. There are some wonderful free apps that allow you to record your screen. If you have a Mac, which I imagine a lot of educators do have, that schools are providing, QuickTime, which is a native app on the Macs, allow you to do a screen recording. It used to only show videos, but now you can do a screen recording. If you have a Mac or a PC, or no matter what you have, Screencast-O-Matic online is an online video recorder and allows some editing. that you know, it doesn't matter what computer you have for that. So don't spend a lot of time making a perfect video. You know, there are some free video recording and editing options out there. But when you're doing videos, watching a movie and watching a video for content are two different things. One is passive, the other is active. You want to provide your students the opportunity to have success in understanding your content videos. So provide them with some helpful things. So one helpful thing you could do, give them a note template where you fill out some of the notes and they have to watch the video to complete the rest of the notes, right? There are some things like Zaption and Edpuzzle and PlayPosit that allow you to put questions in your videos so they can't advance until they answer those questions. But you can always do a Google form at the end after they watch the video. Whatever you do, have some checks for understanding, right? So ask some questions in which students have to answer questions to make sure they understand the video. If you can get the feedback, that's even better because you'll know what students understand and don't understand. Give them the opportunity to ask questions. So you might have a discussion thread on your site in which after they watch the video, they can ask questions. This is a typical sort of, when people are concerned about flipped learning, they say, well, you know, I don't want them to watch a video because how are they gonna ask questions? Well, one way is that to give them a digital way of asking questions. And a few years ago, I moved to having asynchronous flipped learning in my class so that students can watch videos in my class. And I have to tell you, of the years that I did it, I think I had 1 or 2 questions while students were watching a video. So while it might seem like, oh, students can't learn from a video and it's gonna be terrible because they can't ask questions when they're confused, well, give them the opportunity to ask questions. And I'm skeptical of that criticism anyway, because when I tried it out, students didn't even ask questions when they were able to ask questions in real time, but still give them the opportunity. You can also have a feedback form. I like to have a feedback form for all of my videos so that when the next year, you know, in the summer, students, I can look at the feedback that I got for each video and say, oh, you know, this video is consistently getting a rating of 2 or 2.4. That's the video I want to revise, and I can look at the feedback that I got from students. So this is not a required thing, but might be helpful for those who want to get better at making videos.
Sorry to interrupt, Hassan. I just, mindful of the time and everybody's hour-long commitment, I just wanted to ask if you had perhaps a final point you wanted to wrap up.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I think the last thing is that you want to set norms and expectations for those video conferences. So what we don't want are students, you know, showing up in their sleepwear or potentially maybe eating or being in the bathroom, you know, so make sure you have some expectations for how to approach those video conferences. And I would say I am providing a resource. These are all the 20 tips, and I've written a full guide so that, you know, if you want to, you know, review some of this stuff, you can at a later date. So there is a 1-pager that has all those tips here, as well as a full guide where I explain all those tips, basically going through this presentation.